for tonight. All right, it's about, it's actually 10 on the dot, and my guest is already here. The second hour of news hour begins right now. Eric Theuri, the President, the Law Society of Kenya, is with me on the white table tonight. You know, I like hosting him. I'll be telling you shortly. But before we begin our discussion, let's set the stage with the video of the week.
As I have said with clarity, the corrupt, the thieves, the people who steal from the people of Kenya, the people who steal the future of our children, they must leave Kenya. Or they will go to jail. Or they have the option of going to heaven. Wajipange namna hiyo. And it is not a threat. Nasikia watu wengine wanasema, oh, nimethreaten mtu, I have not threatened anybody. It is the truth. And it is an option. And I'm not threatening anybody. It is what we will do. So it's not a threat. Msifikiri ati ni kutisha watu. Hakuna kutisha. Wezi na wakora na wale wanataka na kuendeshana na mambo ya ufisadi watahama Kenya. Ama wataenda jela. Ama waende wapi? Story finish. I am actually shocked that anybody in Kenya, any person in Kenya can defend corruption, can defend wastage, can defend what has made this country go backwards. The sugar industry here imezama kwa sababu tunaleta pesa ya serikali, mabilioni inapotea.
A good place to begin our discussion tonight, and Eric is now on the white table tonight. The reason why I said I like to host him is because the president actually mentioned, singled out of all those teams that spoke out, singled out Azimio and LSK, specifically mentioned. Why do you have a problem with the president cleaning up?
Ken, that's a very interesting question, because why would we have a problem with the president cleaning up? I mean, we ideally would have no problem if he's exercising a power that he has. And then the other question is, what is this cleaning up that we are talking about? The fact of the matter is this, is that we have a constitution and that everyone is governed by that constitution. Mm-hmm. We have laws. And even if we arrest the devil today, he is entitled to due process of the law. So can we substitute what the president knows, what the president wants, or what the president desires to be the laws of this country? So we have two things, and I don't want to use the word that we have options, because that's perhaps what we are discussing here today. The issue is that, is the president bound by the Constitution? And if he is bound, then any issue within this country must be governed within the rule of law. And why do we say so? Because the rule of law can be extremely annoying. In fact, from the ages of Charles Dickens, the law has been equated to an ass, and an ass in this case is a donkey. That a donkey is extremely useful to you, but in one instance or the other, it will kick you. And that's what is the law. that it is useful, but it can kick you. So you don't focus on the fact that it can kick you. You focus on the fact of its usefulness, which outweigh the fact that it can kick you.
Okay.
Yeah. And that is where we are concerned, because as a law society, we have a mandate that has been given to us by statute. And that mandate is to ensure that there is rule of law and constitutionalism, and where we feel that those two are threatened, to be able to speak out and say that if we take this route, then we threaten the rule of law and the administration of justice.
Okay. I want to discuss this, but one of the things that were put on the table yesterday when you made that press statement was to render an apology to Kenyans, to render an apology to the business community. This has not happened. Today, for the 6th time, the president mentioned these 3 options, right? From where you sit, he has gone ahead to dismiss all calls and said, there's no apology. It's a fact. It's the truth. It's not a threat.
And I think that begins to illustrate the concerns that we're having. The head of state is a symbol of national unity, is the custodian of the Constitution. And so what we are talking about are rights and freedoms that are guaranteed to each and every person under the Constitution. And the president swore an oath to protect that Constitution. And in it, the rights that we are saying ought to be protected by the state. And this is where it becomes a matter that must concern you and me. That even though the president knows that what he has said is contrary to the law, he goes ahead and reaffirms that the 3 options which he gave remain to be the truth. And the context in which you are supposed to see the 3 options is that the president is saying that irrespective of what the law says, I am going to enforce this, whether the law allows it or not. In a sense, what the president is saying is that I am above the law. That this country is the wild, wild west, and I am the law. What I say to be the law is what is the law, and it's not what is written in the Constitution. But the thing to focus on so much is the 3 options that the president has given.
I want you to talk to me about those options. Option 1 is voluntary. Says, tour the road, tour the way, what I'm saying, or leave the country. Option 2 is jail. Before you go to jail, you have to be taken through a judicial process.
Yes.
Or the last option is you go to heaven, which means if you don't want to leave the country, if you don't want to go to jail, go to heaven. So I tend to think they're actually anchored in law, especially option number 2. Going to jail is through a judicial process. Why do you have a problem with that option of going to jail? Because it's a judicial, before you are sent there, I believe there must be a judicial process.
Let's examine those options first.
Okay, go ahead.
Under the laws of this country, you have a right to live anywhere in this country. You have a right to own property anywhere in this country. And if you have to leave this country, then you live under 2 circumstances. Either voluntarily because of either you're traveling or you have decided that you want to leave and go to another country, or because you are in this country and you have violated certain conditions that were imposed on you to stay in this country, and for that reason that you are being made to leave. And that's what we call, sort of a deportation process. So that would be the first option. Then we come to the second option.
Which is
Not
available. The first one is not available if you're a citizen.
If you are a citizen,
you can be deported.
You can't be deported. To where? You can't be
You
taken
can't be
anywhere.
deported, yes.
Yeah. And if you are a foreigner, then there are certain prerequisite requirements
Before you're
that
deported.
must be met before you're deported.
Okay.
So that's number one.
Number one, okay.
And how do they operate? By law. You come to option number two.
Jail.
Jail. You cannot be taken to jail unless you have committed an offense, and that offense, the court has confirmed that you've actually committed that offense. So there is also the operation of law and a process. So number one has a process, number two has a process. Number three has a process also, that your life can be taken away by operation of law. And in Kenya, we have the death penalty. You can be taken through the process, and the courts can find that you are supposed to be sentenced to death. And the courts, in appropriate cases, will sentence you to death. And that, under the Constitution, is sanctioned. But there is another option for you to meet your death. And that option is for you to be murdered. To meet your death under circumstances not sanctioned by the law. And so we have to ask ourselves, option one, by the law; option two, by the law; option three, either by the law or outside the law. But in all these instances where we are using the law, it has processes that the president cannot control. It has processes that the president cannot dictate.
Cannot or should not.
Cannot. Not even should not. Cannot. Because if I have committed an offense, even if the president knows that I have committed an offense, he cannot dictate to the court that you must find Theuri guilty because I know he has committed this offense. And so, on all the options that comply with the law, the president cannot dictate. Is it possible that the president can dictate that I leave the country outside the law? It is possible. Is it possible that the president can dictate that I go to jail in circumstances that I am not supposed to be in jail? It is nearly impossible because it requires the acquiescence of the judiciary. Is it possible that the president can decide that I need to lose my life outside the law? It is possible. And I say it is possible because it has happened before in this country. And I think that for every right-thinking Kenyan, that is the concern. That the President of the Republic of Kenya, remember his titles, President of the Republic of Kenya, Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. when you look at that title in itself, what does it mean? That it controls the instruments to either preserve life or to cause death. And that's where it gets extremely uncomfortable.
Why are you worried? Yet there are institutions. I mean, it could be a pronouncement that was made on a campaign trail, or I'll call it the way they usually say it, a roadside declaration that has no backing of the law. Why are you worried? I mean, looking at how you have explained the three processes, there is need and there should be conforming with the law. Why? What worries LSK and the other organizations that came out to condemn this? Because there are processes, there are institutions.
What worries a majority of us, a majority of civil society, is that in the first instance, there are certain pronouncements that should not be made by the head of state. And that secondly, in terms of hierarchy of command, the president is at the top. But there is no other higher person in authority and command other than the president. And so therefore, in a sense, roadside declarations that are made by the president have a much more stronger force than a roadside declaration made by Ken Mijungu or made by any other individual.
In other words, if Nakumicha said this officer needs to be transferred and the president said the same thing, there will be a difference.
There is a difference.
A total difference.
There is a difference in effect. There is a difference in effect. But most important, it's not just in terms of the question of command, but it is in terms of the question of public perception, the question of the pronouncement made by the president vis-a-vis his role as head of state and a symbol of authority, command, and national unity.
Okay.
What message does it send out? Not only to investors, to the international community, but to every ordinary Tom, Dick, and Harry.
Okay.
And the president sits in a very unique position. He sits in a unique position in the sense that there might be information that is available to him that is probably not available to every other person. And that he might be pursuing an otherwise legitimate objective. And in this case, we've had cases of, these are economic saboteurs, and they have gotten hostage of the judicial process, and they're using the judicial process to frustrate government efforts to genuinely resolve the challenges that we face as a country. And those may appear to be extremely legitimate concerns. And indeed, they may be legitimate concerns, taking cognizance of the fact that there is information that is available to the president by virtue of his position and by virtue of the fact that he controls the agencies of intelligence and the agencies that are in charge of security of this country. So it would not be in doubt that the president would have much better information than all of us.
Okay.
that is not in doubt. The question then would be, even if that information is available to him, is it open to the president or to any other person to use that information that is available to them to railroad and say, you know what, even though the Constitution says you can go to court and protect yourself, on this one, you're not going to go to court.
Okay.
And if you go to court, you either go out, or I send you to jail,
Okay.
or I send you to heaven.
When he spoke about 2 days ago on this, one of the things he said in Swahili is sort of msitulete kesi. And this was in reference of the sugar industry. And today, I hope you've seen this notice to withdraw, and it's legitimate, or you haven't seen it, because I don't want to read something that is not legitimate from the judiciary.
Well, I can't confirm, but I can actually say I've seen it.
You've seen it, yeah.
I don't know whether
it's legitimate or not.
Yeah.
So we might be commenting on a document that is not from the judiciary.
Well, let's just say that at this point that I can't confirm that it is actually legitimate.
Okay.
But you see, what does it does? It bears a proper notice of withdrawal, and it bears a receipt from the judiciary portal. And so therefore, on the face of it, looking at that document, it looks like legit. A proper document that has been generated through the judicial e-filing system.
Okay. Now that we say, what do you make of it? He says it a day ago, naizi kesi mtoe, and there's a withdrawal. What do you make of it? Because you're talking about inability of the president to direct or purport to direct the judiciary, or to direct a process in the judiciary. He says that, and a day later, there's a withdrawal.
Well, the notice, if it has been filed by a person who had filed the case in the Court of Appeal, and so therefore is withdrawing that case. And of course, that's one. And two, it would naturally mean that this person is withdrawing that case pursuant to the instructions that were given, or for lack of a better word, the threats that were given that you must withdraw.
But the president wasn't the client.
Well, yes, he wasn't, but he made certain pronouncements, and as a result of those pronouncements, certain actions have been taken, and so there's an obvious presumption, and I remember one time when one of the former members of parliament, Jean-Marie Serenay, was in parliament, and he made certain statements, and he was told, substantiate it. And his response was that you don't substantiate the obvious. And in this case, I think it's a fitting case to say that you can't substantiate the obvious.
Okay. Where do you draw the line as an officer of the court, as a lawyer, as a member of this community, as a Kenyan, between the preservation of public order? If you hear the reasons that the president gave, is about the people who are stealing the future, corrupt cases, killing the industries, ending this need for bailout, and this money comes from the public and goes to these factories, don't you find a justification that there is indeed a need in this country to preserve public order? So the president doing whatever it takes to ensure that this country is streamlined, it should have support more than vilification. Because if it's working, their threats, if they are working, and the president is going that direction to ensure there's indeed some semblance of order in the way the public sector operates, don't you think there's that deserving of condemnation or vilification, or deserving of congratulations? It's working for you.
It's very easy to say that we have achieved the results that we wanted, and so we should all ululate. I think it's easy. The concern is the principle. When we say that the end then justifies the means, where do we draw the line? Where do we draw the line? Because it is an extremely subjective test. Are we going to say that all the time the president would be guided by national interests? As maybe, and I do not for one instance suggest that the motivations in terms of the reasons that have been put forth are not correct. That's not the point, because everyone has his side. He has his side. The investor or the other people who had the cases in court would have their side. And that's not the question of this discussion, whether those concerns and issues are correct or not. The problem is that it is an extremely subjective criteria. And I want to go back to why we make a constitution. We make a constitution because the very basic essence of a human being is self-preservation. I want to self-preserve, you want to self-preserve. And so you do everything possible to ensure that you have a nice livelihood. I do everything possible to ensure that I have a nice livelihood. If all of us do that, what does it create? It creates a situation of anarchy, because all of us are chasing self-preservation.
Learn to ourselves.
Yeah? And why do we then create a constitution? We now say that all of us want to subject ourselves to a certain objective criteria that will ensure that all of us can attain self-preservation. And where we cannot attain self-preservation, that there are mechanisms to ensure that we are able to do that, and that where your need for self-preservation pushes you to go to the extreme, that there is something that pushes you back, and that is the law. And that is why we go for the Constitution, to eliminate the subjective test and adopt a more objective test that takes care of each and every one. My concern and the concern of the Law Society is that the moment we adopt a subjective test, there is nowhere we can draw the line. And the fact that there is nowhere where we can draw the line, it means that you and me and every person in this country is then fair game. Because the test is absolutely subjective. If I think that what I'm doing is good for public interest, then it goes. If somebody else thinks that what they're doing is good for public interest, then it goes. And you cannot now be able to begin to...
It's chaos. It's chaos.
Yeah, and
it's
what
chaos.
it does is that it leads to a situation of chaos.
It's chaos.
Yeah.
One of the things that came to my mind when I heard the sentiments from the president is several years ago, when his predecessor, he was the deputy president then, Uhuru Kenyatta, was faced with such a challenge. He threw up his hands in there and asked, "Mnataka nifanye nini?" I mean, the president is doing. He's not saying, he's not asking people. That difference, still my question, that line that we want to draw between preservation and following what is right. I mean, what it takes to ensure that there is some semblance again. I mean, this is someone who stands and says, "Mnataka nifanye nini?" And this is someone who's doing that same thing. Because there was that discussion at that time that you want me to take everyone to Uhuru Park and shoot them. You remember that discussion? So where again? I'll bring you back there. Yes.
Ken, let me say this. Regrettable as it is, you all remember the case of the two Indian nationals and their driver, who apparently were commissioned or came into the country to assist the then deputy president with certain things with regards to his campaign. And they lost their lives. They were abducted and they lost their lives. And when the president took office, one of the things that he said is that we must end this culture. And he was determined to find out exactly what happened to these two people.
In fact, he said there will never be extrajudicial killings.
There would never be. So the question then would be, what has changed?
But there's never been, at least
I'm not saying that there's been a question of extrajudicial killing. All I'm saying is that there is a case of extrajudicial methods.
Okay.
The killings are just part of
The method.
the methods. And you have to remember that one of the options, option three, is that one that concerns loss of life. And that loss of life is not in accordance with the law. So it amounts
Are
to...
we just misinterpreting this? I have seen a school of thought that says that you are given two options: leave the country or go to jail. This third option is not available because it says you will organize yourself how to do that. So it leaves no other option. I mean, I'm just looking at the different schools of thought. So you only have two options because three is not available. That is a school of thought that has been advanced. Because you can't take three, you have two.
It is comforting to look at it that way. But it's like the proverbial ostrich that is burying its head in the sand. You have to accept it and take it in the most literal senses in which it has been pronounced. If it was an option that was not available, it would never have been put on the table. You would have been told you either leave the country or you go to jail. But there's a third option. So would you want us to pretend the third option doesn't exist?
I just remembered something, but because it's a little bit sensitive, I can't remember verbatim, but there was also a threat to safirisha some individuals forever. What I'm struggling with is us interpreting or giving meaning to perhaps something that is not explicitly said. I mean, as a lawyer, you know that. It was not explicit. Are we struggling just to ensure that we give meaning to this? Or we should just understand from where the president is coming? Theuri. I mean, I'm struggling with this.
You know, for the sake of argument, we can say that perhaps we are stretching the interpretation of this. And to be quite honest, I want to believe that we are actually stretching that interpretation. But I think the question that we have to ask ourselves is that, do we need to be in this position where we're asking ourselves whether we are stretching or we are not stretching? Because the ultimate thing that we must remember, and which I think gets lost in this discussion, is that we are discussing about the rule of law. So if you ask me what the law says, I will go down to the black book withdraw the text and tell you this is what the law says. And it is absolute. It has been interpreted by the courts, and so there is no doubt as to what the law says.
Okay.
So why are we having this discussion in the first place? We are having this discussion in the first place because there are certain pronouncements that have been made that do not conform to the law as we know it, to custom and to practice as we know it. And that is the element of subjectivity that I say comes in when you find yourself in this situation. There's no danger in any of these situations in saying that there are disputes over the ownership and control of Mumias Sugar, and as a government, we do not intend to litigate over these disputes. We want to call the parties to have a discussion over these issues with a view to resolving them. That is an option that is available. The option of these parties, whether they like it or not, they must withdraw these cases, and if they don't, they must either leave the country or this will happen and this will happen, is an option that is not available in a country governed by the rule of law, in a country that observes democratic principles, in a country that is governed on the basis of respect of its constitution, respect of its people, and respect of the universal rights that are guaranteed to a person to enable them to live a life of dignity.
Okay.
So that is a question of principle. And so we have to ask ourselves, as a country, which route do we want to go? Because these are routes that take you asunder. If you are walking on both routes, you will be torn right in the middle. So at one point you have to decide. We take this route that is subjective, that takes us to a banana republic where there are no laws, or at least where the substitute of the law is the wishes and the whims of the person who is in charge of the republic at that particular time, or this other path that then is guided by certain canons and certain minimum that we know that we are not going below that.
Recourse. In this case, what happened? He's spoken. I saw LSK represented by yourself. I saw Amnesty International Kenyan chapter by Irungu Houghton. And I saw Haki Africa by Hussein Khalid. So what is the recourse in this? I mean, for the president, emphasis 6 times is not coincident. The first time it was said in relation to bandits, you remember? Yes, in relation to bandits, then it's become this consistent. The other 5 times in relation to what's happening. I mean, that's emphasis. You have come up, you have condemned the statement. The political side, that's Azimio, has also come out, condemned and demanded for an apology. It's not happening. The president says this is the truth. So what is the recourse? Looking around you as we end the show, because this is a very difficult conversation. What is the recourse?
These are extremely difficult conversations. Difficult in the sense that at a certain extent, it looks like a political contestation of views that, the side is of this view and this other side is of this view. But I think majority of Kenyans are able to appreciate and understand the challenge we face with this kind of situation. And for me, it's so much a question of principle. It's so much a question of ideals. And it's so much a question of, is the law much more important than the views and wishes of one or two individuals? Or are the wishes of one and two individuals much more important than what the law says? For me, that's a concern. And when that question is answered, it leaves no doubt where each and every one of us are standing. The challenge that we are facing is one of messaging, is one of precedence, is one of predictability. So then the question becomes, Ken, if tomorrow me and you are involved in a dispute, is there predictability in terms of how that dispute is going to be resolved? Or is it that someone is going to wake up and say, Ken, you are wrong, you must agree, and if you don't agree, flee, go to jail, or go to heaven?
Well, a good place, unless you have your final remarks, a good place to end the to end the interview tonight. A good place with a good question from Eric Theuri, LSK President. Asante sana kwa kuja. It's a difficult conversation, but an important conversation for this country. Coming from a symbol of unity, we have to talk about it. Thank you so much for coming tonight, and I hope to see you next time. Right. As I let him go, we have a few more stories making headlines for you this afternoon. And Judy Chepchirchir,